The tension in the boardroom was palpable, hanging thick in the air like the scent of a storm about to break. Helen Ellie Montgomery sat at the long, polished oak table, her fingers gripping the edge as she forced herself to sit still. Around her were 12 pairs of eyes, some sympathetic, others curious, all watching her carefully. But it was the one pair that kept her grounded, her son, Ethan Montgomery, that made her feel like she was suffocating. He stood at the head of the table, his sharp suit and slick demeanor giving off an air of authority. But today, his gaze was colder than she had ever felt before. Ethan launched into his presentation, outlining the new direction for their company, Dawson Tech Solutions. But as he spoke, Ellie couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. She had been the one to help build this company from the ground up with her late husband, Nathaniel. She had worked tirelessly, sacrificing her own desires for the sake of the business, for the family. And yet today, it felt as if all those years, all those sacrifices meant nothing. She tried to focus on the slides, the figures, the strategy. But then, Ethan's voice sliced through the air with a coldness that made her stomach churn. "Clearly, we're going to need to streamline our operations," Ethan said, pausing to glance around the table. "And that includes cutting out the dead weight." Ellie's heart stopped. She didn't even need to look up to know he was referring to her. The words rang out, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the polite murmurings of the board members. Her breath caught in her throat. Dead weight! Her own son. The one she had nurtured, the one she had poured her heart and soul into, had just called her that. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. Ethan didn't flinch. There was no remorse in his expression, no hint of regret. His cold gaze was locked on hers, unwavering. The years of motherly love, the sacrifices, the years spent building a future together, they meant nothing now. It was as if she had never mattered. The room went quiet. Ellie could feel the weight of their stares, the silence pressing against her chest. Her mind raced, but her body froze. "Ethan," she whispered his name, but the words caught in her throat. He didn't even acknowledge her, continuing to speak as if she weren't there. For a moment, the room spun, the sounds muffling in her ears as the humiliation set in. It wasn't just the words, it was the utter lack of empathy, the way he had dismissed her, in front of everyone. She felt her face flush with a combination of anger and hurt. How had it come to this? How had her own son turned on her so completely? She wanted to argue, to shout, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, Ellie stood up, slowly, deliberately. She could feel the eyes of the board members on her, but it was Ethan's indifference that made her blood run cold. "Excuse me," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. She didn't look at anyone else as she grabbed her purse and made her way to the door. As her heels clicked across the floor, the weight of her decision settled in. This was the end of a chapter that had been hers for so long. No longer could she bear the weight of being ignored, of being disrespected, of being sidelined by the one person she had trusted the most. She walked out, leaving behind not just the boardroom but her entire life in Seattle. The life she had worked so hard to build, the one she had dedicated herself to, was gone. As the door clicked shut behind her, Ellie didn't feel sadness, nor did she feel regret. She felt a surge of determination. This was her turning point. She would leave behind the life she had known and start anew. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need Ethan. For the first time in years, Ellie felt free. The soft hum of the old coffee machine filled the kitchen as Ellie stirred her morning cup, the scent of rich, dark coffee mixing with the quiet serenity of the home she had shared with Nate for over 30 years. It was hard to believe that so much time had passed. She smiled to herself, the memory of their early days together flooding her mind. It wasn't just the passing years. It was the life they had built together, brick by brick, idea by idea. Nate had always been the dreamer, the visionary. He saw the future in ways no one else could, constantly looking for the next big idea. And Ellie, she had always been his rock, the grounding force that turned his dreams into reality. They were a perfect team. Where Nate was the spark, Ellie was the steady hand that guided their dreams into fruition. Dawson Tech Solutions had started in their cramped apartment with little more than an idea and a few $100s in savings. Nate had worked tirelessly, and Ellie had supported him every step of the way. They worked late into the night, side by side, their vision for a tech company that would revolutionize the industry growing every day. Ellie's role was far from passive. She had been more than just the supportive wife. She had been the operations manager, the problem solver, the strategist. When the company hit its first major breakthrough, Ellie was the one who negotiated the deal, ensuring that Dawson Tech was positioned as a leader in the tech world. She had handled the finances, managed the growing team, and most importantly, kept everything running smoothly while Nate focused on the future. As Dawson Tech flourished, Ellie's influence within the company grew. She helped hire key players, build essential systems, and keep the company's heart beating. Even when Nate traveled for business, Ellie was the one who kept the wheels in motion, ensuring the company's day-to-day operations were flawless. They were partners in every sense of the word. But the brightest moments often have a way of masking the shadows that lie just beneath the surface. The company's rapid growth, while a source of pride, had begun to take its toll on Nate. Long hours, constant pressure, and a relentless drive for success wore him down. Ellie could see it, the exhaustion in his eyes, the stress lines deepening around his smile. Still, she stood by him, always reminding him to slow down, to take care of himself. But Nate, ever the optimist, would just laugh it off, brushing her concerns aside. Then, one day, it all came to a screeching halt. Nate had gone for a run early that morning. Ellie had kissed him goodbye, as she always did, never suspecting that the kiss would be the last one. When the phone rang, she thought it was just a routine check-in, a call about some work matter or a project update. But when the voice on the other end told her that Nate had collapsed on his run, her world shattered. It was sudden, it was unexpected, it was final. Ellie could barely breathe as the words echoed in her ears. The grief was overwhelming. She had never prepared for this. Never imagined a life without him by her side. She had known the company inside and out, but she hadn't known how to live in a world where Nate wasn't there. The funeral was a blur. People came and went, offering condolences, but Ellie couldn't bring herself to care. The house felt empty, too empty, even though it was still filled with reminders of the life they had shared. The business they had built together now felt like a weight, a reminder of the love and loss that had defined their lives. For months, Ellie kept herself busy with the company. She worked long hours, buried herself in tasks that distracted her from the pain. She attended meetings, spoke at conferences, and ensured that the company continued to thrive, but deep down, every step forward felt like a betrayal. How could she go on without him? How could she keep building something he wasn't there to see? Despite the overwhelming sadness, Ellie had no choice but to keep going. She had to keep the company alive, not just for herself, but for Nate. He had believed in it so much, had poured his heart and soul into it. She couldn't let it slip away. As the months turned into years, Ellie began to rebuild. She found new purpose in the work. She continued Nate's legacy with determination and strength, even as she fought against the grief that never fully left. But the company was changing. The people around her, including Ethan, began to look at her differently. She could feel it, the shift in dynamics, the growing distance between her and those she had once been closest to. Yet, through it all, Ellie stood firm. She honored Nate's memory by building Dawson Tech into an empire, but with every success, there was a lingering emptiness. An emptiness she had tried to ignore, and that emptiness grew even more pronounced after that boardroom incident. The truth was, Ellie had never fully healed from Nate's death. She had buried her grief in work, in building the company, in making sure everything kept moving forward. But now, with Ethan's harsh words echoing in her ears, she realized something she had been avoiding for far too long. The life she had been living wasn't just about Nate anymore. It was about her. It was time to stop pretending, to stop grieving for the life she thought she had lost. Ellie's journey was only just beginning. In the years following Nate's death, Ellie had tried to hold everything together. Dawson Tech Solutions had been Nate's dream, but now it was hers to carry forward. She had thrown herself into the work, ensuring that the company stayed on track, maintaining the delicate balance between leadership and grief. But as time passed, things started to shift, subtly at first, almost imperceptible, but undeniable when Ellie took a closer look. Ethan, Nate's only son, had always been more interested in the future than in the present. A visionary, much like Nate, but with a far different approach. Where Nate had been thoughtful, deliberate, and full of compassion, Ethan was sharp, decisive, and increasingly aloof. When he first started stepping into his father's shoes, Ellie had felt a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. She knew this moment would come, the baton being passed, the next generation taking charge, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly things would change. It began with the small things. The meetings that had once been a family affair, where Ellie, Nate, and Ethan would sit down together to discuss the direction of the company, slowly shifted. Ethan started scheduling meetings without consulting her. At first, Ellie didn't think much of it. It made sense, right? He was taking over the role of CEO. But as the weeks went on, the meetings kept happening, and Ellie's presence at them grew less and less. She noticed that when she did attend, her input seemed to carry less weight. Ethan, once so eager to hear her thoughts and ideas, now dismissed them with a polite nod but never any follow-up. Ellie would offer her perspective, rooted in years of experience and deep knowledge of the company, only to be met with a vague comment like, "Thanks, Mom, I'll take that into consideration." Then he'd move on, his attention quickly shifting elsewhere. The first time Ellie truly felt the distance was during a conference call with a potential investor. She had spent days preparing for the meeting, reviewing the financials, the projections, and the business strategy. When the call started, Ethan launched into his presentation with a confidence that Ellie hadn't seen before. He barely acknowledged her at all, and when she finally chimed in with a suggestion about adjusting the financials for more accuracy, Ethan brushed it aside with a curt, "That's already handled." Ellie sat back, her hand still on the phone, the words hanging in the air. The moment stung. She had always been the backbone of Dawson Tech, her expertise shaping the company in ways that Ethan had never fully appreciated. Now, as he took on more of the CEO responsibilities, it was as if he had erased her role from the equation entirely. As weeks turned into months, Ellie started noticing more signs of Ethan's growing autonomy and growing indifference toward her. He had begun making decisions without consulting her. His focus was entirely on streamlining operations, cutting costs, and driving profits, often disregarding the relationships and values that had been central to the company's success under Nate's leadership. Ellie found herself questioning whether this was the company she had fought so hard to build, or if it was something entirely different now, something that had been molded by Ethan's desire to push the company into new, uncharted territory at any cost. It wasn't just the meetings or the decisions, it was the small, everyday interactions. The texts she would send him, checking in on a project or asking about a client, went unanswered for hours, sometimes days. She had always been the one to stay in close contact, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks, but now she felt like an afterthought. Ellie started to feel like a ghost in her own company, her contributions dismissed, her presence increasingly unacknowledged. And yet, Ellie tried to hold on. She couldn't quite bring herself to step away from the company she had helped build, from the place that had been her life's work. But as she watched Ethan rise, taking more control with each passing day, she felt like a silent witness to a transformation that was both painful and inevitable. Inside, Ellie struggled. She had always been the one to push forward, to help Nate build something meaningful. She had always been the one to keep the gears turning, even when the world seemed to spin out of control. But now, she found herself at a crossroads. Should she fight to stay involved, to fight for a place at the table that had once been hers? Or should she accept that the company, and the role she had built for herself, had changed beyond recognition? In her heart, Ellie knew that Ethan wasn't the same man Nate had been. Ethan was determined, yes, but also cold, pragmatic, and increasingly distant. The company was no longer just a family business. It was his now. And Ellie, for the first time, had to confront the unsettling truth. Perhaps she was no longer needed. Still, she refused to admit defeat. Ellie had given her life to Dawson Tech, and no matter how much things had changed, she was determined not to be sidelined. But deep down, she wondered if she had missed the signs for too long. Could she remain a part of a company that seemed to be evolving into something she no longer recognized? As the days wore on, Ellie made a silent promise to herself. She would stay connected, stay involved, but not as the mother, not as the widow holding on to the past. If she was going to have any place in the future of Dawson Tech, she would have to fight for it, not just against Ethan, but against the person she had become. Ellie straightened her blouse and adjusted her blazer as she stood in front of the large glass building that housed Dawson Tech Solutions. The morning sun reflected off the sleek exterior, casting a golden glow across the lobby. She had been here every day, practically since the company's inception, but today felt different. She couldn't quite place it, but there was an unease settling in her chest as she made her way to the elevators. She had been invited to the strategic planning meeting, a session that would set the course for the next fiscal year. In the past, such meetings had been a collaborative effort, Nate, Ellie, and Ethan sitting together, discussing their vision for the company. It was a place where all voices were heard, where Ellie's contributions were valued and her experience respected. She had been the lifeblood of the company for so long, even after Nate's death. As she entered the boardroom, the familiar faces of the senior staff greeted her, some with friendly nods, others with tentative smiles. But Ellie's eyes instinctively sought Ethan. He was already standing at the head of the table, the commanding presence he had grown into since taking over as CEO evident in the way he carried himself. He looked every bit the part, polished, confident, and completely in control. "Morning, Mom," Ethan greeted her coolly, barely glancing up from the laptop screen in front of him. Ellie smiled faintly, taking her seat beside him. She noticed the way he avoided meeting her gaze, the distance that had grown between them more palpable than ever. Still, she pushed the thoughts aside. She had a role to play in this meeting, just as she always had. She was still a partner, still someone who contributed to the company's success. Today, she would prove it. The room quieted as Ethan began the presentation. He clicked through the slides, discussing high-level objectives, budget cuts, and potential acquisitions. Ellie followed along, nodding in agreement, mentally nodding areas where she could add her input. She was ready to step in, to guide the conversation with the same expertise she had always brought to the table. And then, without warning, Ethan moved to the next slide. The screen flickered, and to Ellie's horror, a list appeared at the top of the screen in bold letters. Streamlining operations, non-essential personnel. Ellie's heart dropped into her stomach as she stared at the list, the familiar names of the team members who had been with Dawson Tech since its early days. And then, there it was. Her name. At the top. Helen Ellie, Montgomery, non-essential personnel. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She tried to focus on the words on the screen, but they were swimming, blurring, as her mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. It couldn't be. There must have been a mistake. This was a mistake. She was a partner. She had built this company. She had given everything for this business, for Ethan's future. And now she was listed as non-essential. Ellie's hand trembled, her fingers curling into a fist as she fought to keep her composure. She felt the eyes of the board members on her, some glancing at her, others pretending not to notice. She could hear Ethan's voice in the background, explaining the need for operational efficiency, cutting costs, and simplifying management structures. But the words felt hollow, distant. Ellie's world had just cracked open. Her mind raced, a swirl of emotions flooding her. Confusion, betrayal, anger, but most of all, a profound sadness. She had built this company. She had bled for it. And now it seemed her place in it was nothing more than a footnote, a name on a list that meant nothing. Ethan's actions hit her harder than anything she could have imagined. The room remained silent as the presentation continued, but Ellie felt as if she were in a vacuum. She couldn't hear the words anymore. She couldn't feel the familiar sense of belonging she had always had in this space. She was no longer a partner, no longer part of the team. In Ethan's eyes, she was a relic, a burden, dead weight. She wanted to speak. She wanted to stand up, to shout at Ethan, to demand an explanation, to remind him of everything they had been through together, of everything she had done for him, for the company. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, her voice trapped behind a wall of emotion. She glanced at the board members. Some were uncomfortable, others were oblivious, but none of them met her eyes. Ellie's gaze flicked back to Ethan. He was still speaking, still going on about streamlining operations, about new initiatives, about the future of Dawson Tech. But Ellie didn't hear any of it. She wasn't sure she even cared anymore. In that moment, she understood. Ethan had moved on. He had taken everything he needed from her, the business, the legacy, the family connection, and now he was discarding her like yesterday's news. She wasn't just a bystander in his vision anymore. She was an obstacle. With a forceful, shaky breath, Ellie stood up. The sound of the chair scraping across the floor was jarring in the silence. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the room, the weight of Ethan's betrayal heavy in her chest. She didn't look back, not at the board members, not at Ethan. She walked out, leaving behind the company, the family, and the woman she once was. And for the first time in a long time, Ellie realized she was free. The door to the boardroom clicked shut behind Ellie with a finality that echoed louder than any words spoken inside. For a moment, the weight of the silence pressed against her like a physical thing. She stood in the hallway, her body rigid, her breath shallow. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest like a drumbeat, each pulse a reminder of what had just happened. Dead weight. The words kept circling in her mind, looping around like a broken record. She could still hear Ethan's voice, cold and matter-of-fact, as if the label were nothing more than a trivial fact. But it wasn't just his words, it was the look in his eyes, the utter indifference. The son she had raised, the son she had sacrificed everything for, had just discarded her like a piece of useless baggage. Her fingers clenched into fists as she stood in the hallway, trying to steady herself. Her body wanted to shake, to tremble with anger, frustration, and sorrow. But Ellie didn't let herself do that. She couldn't. Not here. Not now. She had spent so many years holding it all together, making sure everything ran smoothly, always taking care of others, never allowing herself to break. And now, as she stood here, in this moment of reckoning, Ellie knew she was at a crossroads. She couldn't stay, not in Seattle, not in the life she had built with Nate, with Ethan. It was over. She felt it in the marrow of her bones. The company that had once been her world, the family she had fought for, was no longer hers to hold. She had given 25 years to Dawson Tech, pouring her heart into its growth, nurturing it like a child, and now it was slipping from her fingers. The love, the sacrifice, everything she had done had led her to this moment. And now, after all those years, she was nothing more than dead weight. Ellie drew in a slow, shaky breath. She needed to leave. This place, this city, it held too many memories, too much pain, too many things that reminded her of what she had lost. Losing Nate had already been unbearable, but losing her place in the company she had worked so hard to build, the company she had envisioned with her husband, was the final blow. And Ethan's betrayal, the coldness in his voice, had made it clear. She didn't belong here anymore. Her gaze swept across the sterile, white walls of the hallway, the polished floors reflecting her weary face. She had been a part of this place for so long, but now it felt foreign. She didn't recognize herself here anymore. Ellie wasn't the strong, capable woman who had helped build Dawson Tech from the ground up. No, she was now just the remnants of that woman, a shadow clinging to something that no longer existed. Ellie's fingers brushed the cool metal of the elevator button as she pressed it, her movements automatic. She was on autopilot now, her mind still reeling from the moment she had walked out of that boardroom. As the elevator descended, her thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the years she had spent building this company, watching it grow, watching it thrive. She had been there for every milestone, every victory. But what did it all mean now? She had given everything, for this company, for her family, and it had led her here. But maybe that wasn't all it had been about. Maybe there was something more. Ellie's thoughts shifted, slowly at first, then with growing clarity. She had spent so many years trying to hold everything together, trying to make sure everyone else was okay, trying to prove herself. But in the process, she had lost herself. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own desires for the sake of others. And now, as she stood on the precipice of something new, Ellie realized it was time to stop living for everyone else. It was time to live for her. The elevator dinged as it reached the ground floor, and Ellie stepped out into the lobby. She took a deep breath, standing still for a moment, letting the realization sink in. It wasn't just the company she was leaving behind. It was the life she had known for the last 25 years. The house, the office, the familiar routines, the security of being needed, being wanted. And yet, as she stood there, something inside her stirred. There was a quiet strength growing within her, a realization that she still had something left to give. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. Ellie made her way to the exit, the door swinging open with a soft chime. She stepped outside into the crisp Seattle air, the wind brushing against her skin. It was cool, but not uncomfortable. She could feel the weight of her decision lifting with each step. It wasn't going to be easy. Leaving everything behind, everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, would never be easy. But Ellie knew she couldn't stay in a place where she was no longer valued, where her worth was measured by the company she had helped build but was no longer part of. She couldn't keep clinging to the past. She was ready to start over. A new chapter, a new life. Ellie took one last look at the towering glass building of Dawson Tech Solutions, and for the first time, she didn't feel sadness. She didn't feel regret. She felt free. And with that, Ellie Montgomery turned away from the company, from her old life, and walked toward her future, her heart full of resolve. The airport was bustling with the usual noise, the sharp echo of rolling suitcases, the murmur of voices, and the whir of overhead announcements. But Ellie barely registered it. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if each one was an anchor tying her to the life she was leaving behind. The weight of her decision still hung heavy in the air, but there was something else now too, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Ellie walked through the terminal, her carry-on bag rolling smoothly behind her, the sound of the wheels rhythmic and steady. Her mind was a whirlwind, flashing back to moments from the boardroom, to the look in Ethan's eyes as he dismissed her with nothing but cold indifference. She had never imagined that it would end like this, but here she was, walking away from everything she had ever known. From the company she had built, from the house she had shared with Nate, from the life she had crafted meticulously over the years. Her fingers gripped the boarding pass in her hand, and she glanced at the gate number. Austin. She wasn't just flying to a new city. She was flying to a new life, one that was hers to shape, hers to own. The old Ellie, the one who had been the caretaker, the leader, the silent force behind Dawson Tech, was being left behind on that tarmac in Seattle. The flight to Austin was a physical journey, but it was also a mental one. As the plane ascended into the sky, Ellie pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city shrink below her. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of everything she was leaving behind. The old life, the old identity, the expectations that had once been placed upon her, both by the company and by her family. Ellie had been many things over the years: a wife, a mother, a partner in business, a daughter. She had been the one everyone relied on, the one who made sure everything was in order. She had spent so many years wearing those labels, trying to make them fit, trying to fulfill everyone else's needs. But now, as the plane soared higher and higher, Ellie realized that for the first time in a long while, she was no one's anything. She was just her. The thought brought a strange sense of relief. For so long, her life had been defined by the people around her, by Nate, by Ethan, by the company. But now, the future stretched out before her, wide and open, filled with possibilities. She wasn't leaving behind just a physical place. She was leaving behind an old version of herself. The woman who had spent too many years trying to prove her worth, trying to make herself indispensable. She wasn't that woman anymore. She was Ellie Montgomery, and she was free to be whatever she wanted. Austin represented more than just a fresh start. It was a chance to rediscover herself, to create a new identity, one that wasn't tied to the past, to the company, or to the roles she had played for so many years. Ellie had always put others first, had always sacrificed her own dreams for the sake of the company, for the sake of Ethan. But now, for the first time in her life, she could live for herself. She could decide what she wanted to do, who she wanted to be, without the weight of anyone else's expectations. As the plane leveled off and the view outside the window became a patchwork of green fields and distant hills, Ellie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of the recycled air in the cabin was oddly comforting, and she let the feeling of the moment wash over her. This was her moment. She was done with the life that had once felt like a prison, done with the stifling expectations, the corporate meetings, the judgmental looks from her son. Austin was a place where she could be herself, where she could redefine who she was, where she could start over. The thought made her smile, A small, quiet smile, but one that felt like a promise. Ellie Montgomery wasn't just going to survive in Austin. She was going to thrive. The plane began its descent, and Ellie watched the city draw closer, the buildings rising like welcoming arms. She could already imagine the life she would create here. An apartment of her own, a business she could call hers, a future she had designed for herself. No more trying to meet expectations. No more being overlooked. Ellie was free. And as the wheels of the plane touched down on the runway, she made a silent vow, no more looking back. The life she had known in Seattle was behind her. The woman she had been in that life was no more. She was ready to be someone new. Someone for herself. Ellie stepped off the taxi and stood in front of the apartment building, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The morning air in Austin was warm and fresh, the kind of warm that made everything feel possible. The city seemed to hum with energy, a quiet but unmistakable vibrancy that made Ellie feel, for the first time in years, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had found this apartment after only a few days of searching, simple, yet elegant, with tall windows that let in the soft Texas sunlight and a small balcony that overlooked the city's tree-lined streets. It was the perfect space for a fresh start, and Ellie couldn't help but feel a thrill every time she thought about the fact that it was hers. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The rooms were still empty, cold, and bare, but Ellie saw potential in the wide, open spaces. There was no furniture here yet, no personal touches. But for the first time, the blank slate felt like freedom, not emptiness. She could make it anything she wanted, fill it with the things she loved. No more corporate meetings, no more schedules dictated by anyone but her. As she wandered through the apartment, Ellie began to imagine how she would decorate. She had always loved a clean, minimalistic aesthetic, light wood, soft neutrals, a few pops of color. But this time, there would be no compromises, no balancing the needs of a family or a business. It would all be for her. Her mind then turned to the next step, her wardrobe. Gone were the days of corporate suits and power dresses, the clothes that made her feel like she was always performing a role. She wanted something different now, something more her own. She had spent years in clothes that had been chosen for her role, for the image she had been expected to maintain. But now, Ellie was ready to dress for herself, to express herself without worrying about anyone else's opinion. She made her way to the boutique district downtown that afternoon. The shops were a far cry from the luxury stores she had frequented in Seattle. These were smaller, locally owned boutiques with unique pieces, soft, flowy dresses in muted colors, perfectly tailored blazers that still felt relaxed and comfortable, and shoes that looked stylish yet practical. Ellie picked out a few pieces, each item a reflection of the woman she was becoming. Someone who valued comfort, ease, and elegance. Someone who no longer sought validation from others, but instead embraced her own choices. Standing in front of the mirror in the changing room, Ellie tried on a soft cream sweater with simple detailing, paired with a pair of dark jeans. The reflection staring back at her was different, calmer, more at ease. It was the same woman she had been in Seattle, but somehow she felt new. She was no longer a wife, a partner, or a mother trying to prove her worth. She was just Ellie. Ellie smiled at her reflection, her first real smile since leaving Seattle. For so long, she had been defined by the people around her, by the roles she played. But now, for the first time in years, she was defining herself. The realization was liberating. She was free to explore, to grow, to be whoever she wanted to be. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Ellie pulled it out, glancing at the message from Vivienne, her old colleague from Dawson Tech. Vivienne had checked in, asking how she was settling into Austin and if she was considering starting a new business. Ellie smiled at the text. There was no pressure, no expectation. It was just an honest, friendly check-in. The idea of a new venture had crossed Ellie's mind more than once since she arrived. She had always been good at building things from the ground up. After all, she had done it with Dawson Tech. But this time, it would be different. It would be on her terms. This time, she would focus on what she wanted to build, not what others expected of her. She texted Vivienne back. "I think I'm ready to start something new, something just for me." Ellie put her phone back in her pocket and walked back to the boutique counter to pay. As she did, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't rushing, wasn't frantic. She was moving at her own pace in her own time. The pressure, the deadlines, the constant feeling of needing to prove herself, those were things of the past. The future now was full of possibility. Later that evening, Ellie stood on her small balcony, looking out at the twinkling lights of downtown Austin. The city was alive, its pulse steady and inviting, and Ellie felt it. She felt a connection to this place, to this fresh start. For the first time in a long time, Ellie felt like she was living for herself. There was no one to answer to, no expectations to meet. She could go anywhere, do anything. The opportunities were endless. As the evening breeze rustled the trees below, Ellie made herself a promise. She would take things one step at a time. She would build her life with intention, with purpose. She wouldn't rush into anything, but she was excited. For the first time in years, Ellie was excited about the future. The world was hers to shape now. And she was ready. It was late afternoon when Ellie's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, snapping her from her thoughts. She had spent the day unpacking, organizing her new apartment, and contemplating the future. Everything felt like it was slowly falling into place. Her new wardrobe, her new space, her new sense of self. But as she glanced at the name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. Vivienne Clark. Ellie hadn't heard from Vive in a while. She had been so wrapped up in her own life that she hadn't kept in touch as much as she would have liked. But Vivienne had been more than just a colleague at Dawson Tech. She had been a friend, someone who understood Ellie's role in the company and the deep sacrifices she'd made over the years. Ellie hesitated for only a moment before swiping the screen to answer. "Vive," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Ellie," Vivienne's voice came through the phone, soft, but laced with an urgency that Ellie didn't quite understand. I didn't know how else to reach you. But I think you should know what's going on." Ellie's pulse quickened. She had a sinking feeling she knew what Vivienne was about to say. It had only been a few days since Ellie walked out of that boardroom, but the memory still felt fresh, the sting of betrayal still raw. And now, Vivienne's tone told Ellie that something was amiss at Dawson Tech. "What's happening?" Ellie asked, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "Ethan's in over his head," Vivienne said, the words heavy with concern. "The company's struggling, Ellie, really struggling. He's been making some questionable decisions, cutting corners, losing clients. I don't know if he can turn it around. Things are a mess." Ellie closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of her son's failure crashing down on her. She had seen the signs, the way Ethan had distanced himself from her, the decisions he had made without consulting her, the way the company had started to shift under his leadership. But hearing Vivienne's words brought the reality of the situation into sharp focus. It wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. It was about the company Nate and Ellie had poured their hearts into. Ellie's hand tightened around the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief swirling inside her. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Vivienne hesitated before replying, her words measured. "Bad, really bad. We've lost a few major clients, and there's talk of the board wanting to take action. Ethan's not handling the pressure well. It's not just the business, it's the morale. People are leaving. There's no direction anymore." Ellie felt a deep pang in her chest. The company they had built together was crumbling, and Ethan, her son, her flesh and blood, was at the helm, unable to steer the ship. "I'm sorry to hear that," Ellie said, trying to steady herself. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She had left Dawson Tech for a reason. She had left because she needed to reclaim her life, to free herself from the suffocating expectations. But the thought of the company she had built with Nate, the company she had spent so many years shaping and nurturing, slipping through her fingers, it was unbearable. Vivienne's voice pulled Ellie from her thoughts. "Ellie, I know this isn't easy, but I'm sending you something." There was a pause, as if Vivienne was weighing her next words carefully. "I've sent you the client contact database. I've been holding on to it just in case. You need to know what's happening, Ellie. You should know. If you want to take control again, I think it's time." Ellie stared at the phone in her hand. The database. It was everything. The clients, the contracts, the history of Dawson Tech. It was the very lifeblood of the company, and Vivienne had given it to her, trusting her to decide what to do with it. The silence between them stretched, but this time, Ellie didn't need words. She didn't need Vivienne to say anything more. Everything was clear now. Ellie had spent so many years standing in the shadows, working tirelessly, keeping the company's wheels turning while others took the credit. But now, as she stood at the crossroads of her new life in Austin, she realized something. She wasn't just going to walk away from everything she had built. She had spent 25 years creating Dawson Tech Solutions, shaping it into what it was. She had sacrificed too much, worked too hard, to let it all slip away because of Ethan's mistakes. Ellie's fingers hovered over the phone screen, and for a moment she felt the weight of the decision. She could walk away. She could ignore Vivienne's message, continue her new life in Austin, and never look back. But that wasn't who she was. She was Ellie Montgomery. She had spent a lifetime building, creating, and fighting for something she believed in. And if Dawson Tech was going to survive, it needed her. Not as a shadow of the past, not as someone who had been cast aside, but as the woman who had always been the backbone of the company. Ellie's resolve solidified like steel. She was going to take control again on her terms. The future of Dawson Tech wasn't in Ethan's hands anymore. It was in hers. "I'm not done," Ellie whispered to herself, a sense of empowerment flowing through her veins. She tapped the screen and opened the database. The first step was clear. She was going to take back what was rightfully hers. And this time, she wasn't going to play second fiddle. Ellie sat at the polished wooden desk in her new office, the faint hum of the city below drifting through the open window. The office itself was modest, small, but bright and full of promise. It was a world away from the towering skyscrapers of Seattle, a quiet space that felt entirely her own. No longer did she have to navigate corporate politics or deal with unappreciative board members. This was her place, and it was a reflection of who she was becoming: independent, driven, and above all, free. Her first client meeting was set for 2:00 p.m. She had been preparing for days, poring over the details, understanding the problems the company was facing, and how her experience could help. It was a company in need of restructuring, facing a steady decline in profits due to inefficient operations. As Ellie reviewed the client's financials and challenges, she couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. This was what she was made for: solving problems, identifying opportunities, and making things work. She had done it for Dawson Tech, and now she was doing it for herself. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. She stood up and smoothed her skirt, trying to keep the nerves at bay. She wasn't nervous about the work she had done this countless times, but this was different. This was her business now, her reputation on the line. There was no one else to rely on but her. When she opened the door, she was greeted by a sharp-dressed man in his late 40s, his hand extended in greeting. His name was Andrew Pierce, the CEO of a mid-sized logistics company struggling to stay afloat. He smiled, but Ellie could tell it didn't reach his eyes. He was here for a solution, and he hoped she had one. "Ellie Montgomery, it's a pleasure," Andrew said, his voice confident but weary. "I've heard good things about you, but I'm not here for pleasantries. We need results." Ellie smiled warmly, shaking his hand. "I understand. Please come in. Let's talk about how we can turn things around." As they sat down at the sleek, minimalist table in her office, Ellie unfolded her laptop and pulled up the documents she had prepared. She began outlining her understanding of Andrew's company's issues, her tone calm but assured. "From what I've seen, your company has excellent potential," Ellie began, glancing at the figures on the screen. "But right now, you're bogged down by operational inefficiencies, outdated technology, and a lack of effective communication between departments. These issues are affecting your margins, and if not addressed, they'll only get worse." Andrew nodded, his brow furrowed as he listened. "You're not wrong. We've been struggling to keep up with the market, and our competitors are pulling ahead. We've tried to make changes, but it's been a patchwork job, nothing cohesive. We need someone who can look at the bigger picture, someone who understands how to integrate solutions that work long-term." Ellie smiled, a spark of confidence lighting her eyes. She had done this before. This was her expertise, The ability to see the forest through the trees, to craft a strategy that didn't just solve short-term problems but built sustainable growth. "You're absolutely right," Ellie said. "What you need is a comprehensive strategy. We'll start by streamlining your operations, integrating new technology where necessary, and making sure your departments are working in sync. It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about building a foundation for growth so you can scale effectively. This is what I've done for over 25 years, and I'm confident that I can do it for you." Andrew looked at her, his skepticism beginning to fade. She could see the shift in his demeanor as he realized that Ellie wasn't just offering vague solutions or promises. She was offering actionable, results-driven strategies, the kind of strategies that had been her specialty at Dawson Tech. "Sounds like you've thought this through," Andrew said, leaning back in his chair, his tone now one of genuine interest. "But I'll be honest, I've worked with consultants before and the results have been disappointing." Ellie didn't flinch. She had heard this before, but she knew more than anyone that her track record spoke for itself. She had helped build a tech empire, she had saved failing departments, and she had always found a way to make things work. She wasn't just a consultant, she was someone who got things done. "I don't just talk the talk, Andrew," Ellie said, her voice steady. "I've been in your shoes. I've led a company through ups and downs. I've managed operations, implemented change, and turned struggling companies into profitable, thriving businesses. This isn't just theory for me. It's what I've spent my life doing." Andrew studied her for a moment, the doubt now fully gone from his eyes. "All right, Ellie, let's do it. Let's move forward." The words felt like a victory, but Ellie knew this was just the beginning. The next few months would require everything she had. She would be the one to craft solutions, to implement changes, and to lead this company back to success. There would be sleepless nights, countless meetings, and hurdles to overcome, but she wasn't afraid. As Andrew stood to leave, he shook her hand once more, this time with a genuine smile. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do. Let's make this happen." Ellie watched him leave, and as the door clicked shut behind him, she felt a sense of pride and excitement wash over her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She was building something of her own, and she had the power to make a real impact. As she sat back down at her desk, Ellie allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had taken the first step, and it was just the beginning. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to make it happen. Ellie sat at her desk, reviewing her notes for the upcoming meeting with Andrew from the logistics company. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, building her new consulting business, gaining traction with her first client, and adjusting to this new chapter of her life. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt in control. Her confidence was growing, and she could see the potential for her business taking shape. But as she was finalizing some strategies on her laptop, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made her pause for a moment. Ethan Montgomery. Her son. For a split second, Ellie considered letting it go to voicemail. After all, it had been days since she'd left Seattle, and she hadn't heard from Ethan at all. She didn't even know how to process their last interaction, how he had discarded her, labeling her dead weight in front of his board. Since then, Ellie had focused on moving forward, leaving behind the hurt and betrayal. But then something tugged at her. Curiosity, maybe, or just the lingering connection of motherhood. She had spent so many years nurturing Ethan, supporting him through every stage of his life. Could she really ignore him now when he was reaching out? With a deep breath, Ellie answered the call. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice even, betraying none of the tumultuous feelings stirring inside her. "Mom," Ethan's voice came through, low and hesitant, as though unsure of how to proceed. There was no arrogance, no bravado in his tone, only something that, for the first time in a long while, sounded like genuine concern. "I need to talk to you about Dawson Tech." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She leaned back in her chair, the faint hum of the city below growing distant in her ears. She had expected this call. She knew deep down that Ethan wouldn't be able to shoulder the weight of the company's decline alone, but hearing it confirmed still stung. "Go ahead," she said, her voice soft but firm. "What's going on?" Ethan took a breath, and Ellie could almost picture him standing there, packing, searching for the right words. The company's struggling, Mom, really struggling. I don't know what happened. We've lost clients, and I've been trying to fix it, but it's not working. I'm at a point where I don't know what else to do. I need your help. Ellie could hear the desperation in his voice, and for a moment she almost felt sympathy. But then she remembered the look in his eyes during that boardroom meeting, the way he had dismissed her so effortlessly. He hadn't needed her then. Now, with the company in trouble, he was asking for her help. It was a bitter pill to swallow. "And what exactly do you want from me?" Ellie asked, her tone cool but controlled. She had worked too hard to get to this place, to reclaim her life and her independence, to fall back into the pattern of playing second fiddle to Ethan's whims. There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, and when he did, his words came out in a rush, as if he knew he was on borrowed time. "I was thinking, maybe we could partner up. I know you've started your consulting firm and you've got the experience. I need you to help turn Dawson Tech around. We can fix the company together, bring it back to what it was." Ellie's stomach churned. The offer, the words, the desperation, it all felt like a thinly veiled plea for salvation. But as the words sank in, Ellie couldn't help but see the truth beneath them. This wasn't just about fixing Dawson Tech. It was about Ethan's failure. His inability to lead, and his refusal to face the consequences of his actions. Ellie closed her eyes briefly, her mind replaying the moments when she had been sidelined, when Ethan had ignored her advice, when he had taken the reins of the company without truly understanding what it meant to lead. He had wanted to build his own legacy, to take control. And now, when it was all falling apart, he was asking for her help, as though the past 2 decades of sacrifice didn't matter. She had spent years holding everything together for him, for Nate, for the company. But Ethan had never understood the weight of those years. He had always taken it for granted that Ellie would be there, supporting him, fixing the problems he didn't want to deal with. And now, when the company was on the verge of collapse, he was offering her a seat at the table. But Ellie wasn't sure she could go back to that. She wasn't sure she could trust him again. "I'm not sure that's the right move, Ethan," Ellie said, her voice calm but resolute. "I've built something for myself now. I've worked hard to create Dawson Consulting, and I'm not going to throw that away just because you're struggling." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and Ellie could almost hear the weight of Ethan's disappointment. He had expected her to rush in, to save the day as she always had. But Ellie knew better now. She wasn't his safety net anymore. "Mom, please," Ethan's voice was raw now, a mix of frustration and regret. "I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to help me fix this. Dawson Tech needs you. I need you." Ellie let his words hang in the air for a moment before responding, her voice firm, yet tinged with sadness. "You've got to do this on your own, Ethan. I've given you everything I had. But now it's time for you to learn what it really takes to lead. If Dawson Tech is going to survive, it's going to be because you take responsibility for it, not because I bail you out." She paused for a moment, letting the finality of her words sink in. She could hear Ethan's breathing on the other end of the line, heavy with the weight of her decision. "I have to go, Ethan," Ellie said quietly. "But I believe in you. I hope you find your way." With that, she ended the call. Ellie sat there for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling in. She had said what needed to be said, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Ethan's arrogance, his refusal to acknowledge his mistakes, had led him to this point. But Ellie wasn't going to let his failure drag her back into the past. She had built a life for herself now, and that life was about her, not about fixing everyone else's messes. The call had been a painful reminder of how far Ethan had fallen and how far she had come. Ellie took a deep breath and turned her attention back to the future. There was work to be done, clients to help, and a business to grow. And for the first time in years, Ellie was ready to focus on herself. The phone call came in the middle of a busy afternoon, right as Ellie was wrapping up a strategy session for her new client, Andrew from the logistics company. She had just finalized a proposal for a new operational system, one that would cut costs and streamline their internal processes. It was a solid plan, and she knew Andrew was going to love it. but nothing could have prepared her for the call that came next. "Ellie, this is Tyler Adams." A smooth voice came over the line. "I'm calling to let you know that we've decided to move forward with your proposal." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Tyler Adams Ventures, one of the most respected private equity firms in the area. They had a reputation for only working with the best, and their decision to partner with her, an upstart consultant from Austin, felt like a dream come true. "You've got the job, Ellie," Tyler continued, his voice warm but professional. "We've been impressed by your approach and the way you've handled the initial meetings. We're ready to bring you in to restructure our operations and provide the strategic overhaul we need. We'll get the paperwork sorted, but I wanted to personally congratulate you." Ellie's hand tightened around the phone, a rush of excitement flooding through her veins. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment she had dreamed of when she first decided to step away from Dawson Tech and start something of her own. She had proven to herself that she was capable, that she could do this without anyone else's help. She could stand on her own. "Thank you, Tyler," Ellie said, trying to keep her voice steady, but her heart was racing. "I'm excited to get started. This is exactly the type of project I've been looking for." As she hung up the phone, she couldn't help but smile. This was it, her first major contract. She had spent years helping build Dawson Tech, but this was her own work, her own success. No one else could claim credit for it. Over the next few weeks, Ellie dove into the project with all the energy and focus she had. Tyler Adams Ventures was facing some significant challenges: inefficiency in their operations, a lack of alignment between their departments, and a general sense of disorganization at the leadership level. Ellie spent hours sifting through their internal reports, meeting with key stakeholders, and gaining a deep understanding of the company's goals and pain points. Each day, she felt her confidence grow. The solutions came to her with ease. She was no longer just the person behind the scenes, pulling strings and making things happen for others. She was the one in control now, making the decisions, leading the charge. Her work was methodical and deliberate. Ellie began restructuring their operational processes, recommending new systems for project management, and streamlining communication between departments. She implemented technology upgrades that would allow them to track their progress in real time, ensuring that goals were met and that there were no surprises down the line. It wasn't just about making changes. It was about creating lasting improvements that would set Tyler Adams Ventures up for long-term success. By the time she presented her final recommendations to the board, Ellie felt a sense of pride that she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't the silent partner anymore. She was the one they were all turning to for guidance, the one with the answers. The presentation went off without a hitch, and the board members were impressed by her thoroughness, her strategic thinking, and her ability to provide clear, actionable solutions. It was a major win for her, and the recognition she received felt as rewarding as any accolade she had earned at Dawson Tech. Afterward, Tyler Adams himself pulled her aside. "Ellie, I have to say, I'm more than impressed," he said, offering her a firm handshake. "You've done incredible work here. I'm looking forward to seeing what else you can do for us in the future." Ellie smiled, feeling the weight of his praise settle in her chest. She had done it. She had stepped into a new field and proven herself as more than just someone who could make a company run smoothly. She had become a trusted expert, a consultant whose insights were now being sought after by some of the top players in the industry. As Ellie drove home that night, the city lights of Austin twinkling in the distance, she felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. This was her success. Her hard work, her ideas, her ability to think outside the box, these were the things that had earned her this contract. And in that moment, she realized just how far she had come. The stark contrast to where she had been not so long ago was undeniable. Ellie had spent years at Dawson Tech, pouring herself into the company, making sacrifices for a business she no longer recognized under Ethan's leadership. She had built it, nurtured it, only to be cast aside when it no longer suited Ethan's vision. Now, here she was, not just surviving, but thriving on her own terms. Ellie took a deep breath as she parked her car. She was no longer tethered to the past. She wasn't the woman who had been dismissed as dead weight. She wasn't the woman who had been left behind in the boardroom. She was a businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with, and her future was brighter than she had ever imagined. The journey was just beginning, and Ellie was ready to lead the way. Ellie's office was filled with the hum of productivity. It had been months since her first big contract with Tyler Adams Ventures, and her consulting business, Dawson Consulting, was flourishing. The small, humble office in downtown Austin was now a bustling hub of activity. New clients were reaching out almost every week, eager to tap into her expertise. Word of her success had spread, and Ellie was quickly becoming known as one of the top consultants in the area. Each new project was a fresh challenge, and Ellie thrived in the complexity of it all. She was able to use the lessons she had learned over her years at Dawson Tech, but now she had the freedom to approach problems in her own way, without the constraints of corporate politics or family drama. Her method was simple but effective. Dive deep into the core issues, develop sustainable systems that would continue to drive success long after her work was done, and always keep the long-term vision in mind. Her clients, ranging from mid-sized startups to established companies like Murphy Ventures, praised her ability to identify operational inefficiencies and turn them into opportunities. With each company she worked with, Ellie's reputation grew. She was not just solving problems, she was building businesses that could thrive for years to come. Ellie's approach was always strategic and thorough. She would spend weeks immersing herself in every aspect of her clients' operations, from their supply chains to their internal communications, from their financials to their corporate culture. She would then create a tailored strategy, recommending specific systems and processes that would foster long-term growth. Her solutions were never quick fixes. They were carefully designed, sustainable frameworks that addressed the root causes of the issues. One of her most recent clients, a tech startup called Nova Innovations, was a case in point. They were struggling to scale their operations, unable to keep up with their rapid growth. Ellie worked closely with their team to implement an integrated project management system, streamline their customer service processes, and built a solid foundation for their marketing department. Within months, Nova Innovations was operating more efficiently. Their profit margins had improved, and they were well on their way to becoming a major player in the industry. As Ellie helped others rebuild their businesses, Dawson Tech's struggles became more apparent to her. She still kept a distant eye on her old company, despite her decision to walk away. Every now and then, she would check in with Vivienne, who kept her updated on the state of things. And every time, the news was worse than before. Ethan's decisions were taking a toll. The company was hemorrhaging clients, key employees were leaving, and profits were steadily declining. Vivienne shared how Ethan had been attempting to implement quick fixes, but nothing was sticking. His inability to effectively manage the company had become glaringly obvious. He had lost the confidence of his team, and without the guidance of his mother or the steady hand of his father, Dawson Tech was spiraling. Ellie knew Ethan was struggling. She had seen the signs even before she left, but now, the reality of his failure was inescapable. It was one thing to be at the helm of a company, trying to steer it through stormy waters. It was another to have no real plan for the future, no vision, no understanding of the fundamentals. Ethan had wanted to prove that he could do it on his own, but now he was facing the consequences of that pride. One afternoon, as Ellie was reviewing a new proposal from a potential client, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Vivienne. "Ethan's asking for your help again. The board is losing faith in him. They want to know if you'd be willing to come back and help fix the company. They're desperate." Ellie stared at the message for a long moment, her mind racing. She had expected this, but that didn't make it any easier. Part of her felt sympathy for Ethan. He was her son, and no matter what had happened between them, she couldn't help but wish he had succeeded. But another part of her, one that had been quietly growing stronger since her departure, felt nothing but resolve. She wasn't going back to Dawson Tech, not to save Ethan, not to save the company. Instead, Ellie turned her attention back to her own work. She knew her path now. She wasn't going to fight for a company that had discarded her. She had created something on her own, something that had grown and thrived because it was built on her own principles, her own values. Ellie had found her place in the world, and it wasn't going to be in the shadows of Dawson Tech anymore. As she worked with her clients, Ellie couldn't help but feel a growing sense of satisfaction. She was doing exactly what she was meant to do, and the more she helped others rebuild their businesses, the more she realized the depth of the lessons she had learned at Dawson Tech. Meanwhile, Ethan's situation continued to worsen. Vivienne called Ellie one last time with the final update. He's taking out loans. He's cutting more staff. There's talk of selling parts of the company to stay afloat. I don't think Dawson Tech will make it through the year if something doesn't change. Ellie closed her eyes as she heard the words. It was painful, but there was nothing more she could do. She had given Dawson Tech everything she had. She had built it, nurtured it, and tried to save it. But Ethan had chosen his own path. He had let his pride get in the way, and now he had to deal with the consequences. Ellie's heart was heavy, but she wasn't about to go back. She had a business to run, clients to serve, and her own future to build. The decisions she had made were difficult, but they were the right ones. The contrast between the company she was building and the company Ethan was destroying was as clear as day. As the sun set over Austin that evening, Ellie sat back in her chair, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. Dawson Consulting was thriving. She was thriving. And as for Dawson Tech, well, that was no longer her responsibility. It was Ethan. The knock on the door came at 2:00 p.m. sharp. Ellie had been working in her office, sorting through client reports and preparing for an upcoming meeting, when the sound of someone at the door interrupted her focus. She looked up from her desk, her heart skipping a beat before she could even process the moment. She didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Ethan. For a split second, Ellie considered pretending she wasn't home. She had moved on from Seattle for a reason, and she had no intention of reopening old wounds. But the truth was, she had been waiting for this moment, even if she didn't fully understand why. With a deep breath, Ellie rose from her desk and walked to the door. When she opened it, there he stood, her son. Now a shell of the man he once was. His sharp suit, once so immaculate, looked a bit more rumpled now, his tie slightly askew. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "Hi, Mom," Ethan said softly, his voice tentative, unsure. Ellie's chest tightened. She hadn't seen him in months, not since she walked out of that boardroom in Seattle, and though she had made peace with their strained relationship, seeing him like this, the son she had once adored, who had once been full of promise, brought a wave of sadness and something else, too. Something deeper. Regret. She stepped aside to let him in, her mind running through 1,000 emotions at once, but her face remained calm, composed. "Come in," she said, keeping her tone neutral. Ethan entered the small apartment, glancing around at the neat, yet cozy space she had made her own. The modern furnishings, the light, airy feel of the place, everything here was hers, everything a reflection of her newfound independence. Nothing about this place said past or family business. This was Ellie's life now, and it was all on her terms. "I didn't want to just call," Ethan began, his voice carrying a hint of discomfort as he shifted from foot to foot, clearly unsure of where to start. "I needed to see you, to talk about everything." Ellie remained silent, gesturing toward the small seating area. "Let's sit down." They both sat, but the tension between them was palpable. Ellie could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but she refused to break eye contact. She had given him everything she had, and now it was his turn to come to terms with the choices he had made. After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke again, his words laced with frustration and vulnerability. "I messed up, Mom. I see that now. Dawson Tech it's failing. And it's all my fault. I thought I could handle it, that I could take the reins. But I didn't know how to do it right. And I pushed you away when you tried to help. I didn't listen." Ellie let his words sink in. She had expected some version of this conversation, but hearing it from him, actually hearing him admit his mistakes, was different. The Ethan she had known was never one to show weakness, never one to ask for help. But now, here he was, broken and desperate. She took a deep breath, her gaze hardening slightly. "You were never willing to listen, Ethan. You never wanted my help, not when it mattered. And now look where we are." Ethan looked down at his hands as if ashamed to meet her eyes. I know, and I wish I had listened. I was too proud. I thought I could do it on my own. And now the company's falling apart. I've lost the board's confidence. We've lost clients. We're barely keeping things afloat. Ellie's eyes softened, but only for a moment. And yet, you didn't think to reach out to me until now. You didn't think to ask for help when it was clear you were in over your head. Ethan's shoulders slumped, and Ellie could see the exhaustion in his face. It wasn't just the business, it was everything. The weight of being in charge without understanding what it truly meant. The pressure of running a company that had been built by someone else. It was too much for him, and now he was facing the consequences of his arrogance. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could take control, but now I see I can't. I've been fighting the wrong battles, pushing people away who actually wanted to help. And the more I tried to prove myself, the worse it got. Ellie stayed silent for a long moment, her mind weighing his words carefully. The truth was, she had been prepared for this moment. She had seen Ethan's pride, his stubborn refusal to admit that he wasn't ready to lead, and now the reality was impossible to ignore. She had given so much to Dawson Tech, but it was clear that Ethan wasn't the leader the company needed. And maybe more painfully, he wasn't the son she had raised. I'm sorry, Mom, Ethan whispered, his voice breaking just slightly. I should have listened. I should have seen what you were trying to do. Ellie felt a sting in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had mourned the loss of the son she once knew. The boy who had been so eager to learn, to listen, had been replaced by a man who had let his pride cloud his judgment. But hearing him speak now, hearing the regret in his voice, made her realize something else, something that she hadn't truly accepted until this moment. She could no longer save him. I'm sorry too, Ethan, Ellie said, her voice steady but firm. I'm sorry I wasn't able to help you before, but I'm not going to fix this for you. I've spent my whole life doing that, and it's not my job anymore. Ethan's eyes darted to hers, confusion and pain swirling in them. What do you mean? I mean, Ellie interrupted, her voice clear and resolute, I'm not going back to Dawson Tech. I'm not going to be your safety net anymore. You need to figure this out on your own, Ethan. You've got to take responsibility for your mistakes and learn from them. I'm not your solution anymore. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. This wasn't about punishment or anger. It was about Ellie finally taking control of her own life. Her future was no longer tied to Dawson Tech, and it certainly wasn't tied to Ethan's failures. For the first time, she felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. Ethan stared at her for a moment, the hurt in his eyes slowly turning into something more resigned, something that hinted at understanding. He nodded slowly, his face contorting with the recognition of the truth. I get it, Mom, I do. As Ellie stood to walk him to the door, she felt a mixture of sadness and peace. The son she had once known was no longer there, and maybe he never would be again. But that didn't mean she had to carry the weight of his mistakes anymore. I believe in you, Ethan, she said softly, her hand resting on the door as she opened it. But you need to fix this on your own. As he walked out into the hallway, Ellie closed the door behind him, the finality of it settling deep in her chest. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but it was also the right thing. Ellie took a deep breath, ready to face her future. It was time to move forward, time to stop carrying the past. And for the first time, Ellie felt certain of her place in the world. Ellie was in the middle of reviewing a new business proposal when the phone call came in. Her first instinct was to ignore it. She had been juggling multiple client meetings that day, and she was just about to break for lunch. But the moment she saw the name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. Vivienne Clark. Ellie had been hopping to hear from her, but not like this. She set down the papers in front of her and answered the call, her pulse quickening. Vive, Ellie said, trying to keep her voice calm. Ellie, it's bad. Vivienne's voice came through, tight with urgency. I hate to be the bearer of more bad news, but you need to know what's going on. Ellie's stomach clenched. She had been trying to distance herself from Dawson Tech, but it seemed that no matter how far she went, the weight of it still lingered. She braced herself for whatever Vivienne was about to say, already dreading the news. "What's happened now?" Ellie asked, though she feared she already knew. "Ethan, he's taken out a loan," Vivienne began, the words coming in a rush. "A big one. A loan against the company's assets. It's huge, Ellie, and the worst part, he's listed you as a co-signer." Ellie felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. She gripped the edge of her desk to steady herself, her breath catching. "What? What do you mean he listed me as a co-signer?" Vivienne's voice grew more anxious. "I didn't know about it until recently. Apparently, Ethan's been using company assets as collateral for a loan he took to keep the business afloat. But the terms are bad, Ellie, really bad. And now, if the company defaults, if they can't pay back the loan, you could be held liable just like him." Ellie's mind raced. She could barely focus on Vivienne's words as the implications of the news sank in. A loan. A massive loan. And she was on the hook. All these months, she had been focused on rebuilding her own life, focused on her new consulting business, and yet, here she was, unknowingly tied to Dawson Tech's financial ruin. Ethan had gone behind her back, pulling her into a reckless decision without so much as a word of warning. Her breath became shallow as anger flared in her chest. "Ethan knew about this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "He knew he was putting me at risk." Vivienne sighed. "He knew, Ellie. I tried to warn him, but he was desperate. The board was threatening to cut him loose, and he panicked. He took out the loan hoping it would buy him time, but the interest rates are sky high. The company's already struggling, and now he's put you at risk, too." Ellie's mind spun, the walls of the room narrowing as she tried to process the weight of what Vivienne was telling her. This was more than just a bad business decision. It was a betrayal. Ethan had acted without thinking, without consulting her, without any regard for the consequences. And now she was at risk of losing everything she had worked for. Her new business, her new life, all of it could be threatened by Ethan's reckless choices. "Vive, I need the details," Ellie said, her voice steady now, her resolve hardening. "I need to see the loan terms, everything." "I'll send them over," Vivienne said quickly. "I don't know if it'll help, but you need to know what you're facing. I don't want you to be blindsided." The call ended, but Ellie didn't move. She stared at the phone in her hand, her mind racing, her pulse pounding. How could Ethan have done this? She had left Dawson Tech to reclaim her life, to build something of her own. And now, in a single move, he had put her right back in the middle of the mess she had walked away from. But there was no time to wallow in disbelief. Ellie was no stranger to adversity. She had built Dawson Tech into something great, and she had done it with hard work, intelligence, and strategy. She was no different now. She wasn't going to let Ethan's mistake drag her down. Ellie stood up, her eyes scanning the room as her mind started to plan. She would need a lawyer, someone who could help her understand the full extent of her liability and guide her through protecting her personal assets. She would need to move quickly, before this loan spiraled into something worse. She had spent years managing Dawson Tech's finances, and she knew the dangers of poor financial management all too well. This loan could be the company's undoing, and she refused to let it be hers as well. She walked to the window of her office, looking out at the Austin skyline, the city buzzing with life beneath her. A deep breath filled her lungs. This wasn't the first time she had faced a challenge like this. She had weathered worse, and she would weather this too. Ellie's phone buzzed again. Vivienne's email had come through, the loan documents attached. Ellie sat back down, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she opened the file, scanning through the terms. The loan was even worse than she had imagined. High interest rates, short repayment periods, and the potential for personal liability if the company defaulted. It was a ticking time bomb. But Ellie didn't panic. She had faced bigger challenges in her career, and she had learned how to keep a cool head. This was no different. She reached for her phone and dialed the number of her trusted lawyer, Jamie Cross. "Jamie, I need you to help me with something urgent," she said, her voice calm but determined. "It's about Dawson Tech." As she spoke, Ellie's mind shifted into full strategist mode. She would fight this. She would protect what she had built. And no matter what, she wasn't going to let Ethan's reckless decisions tear her down. Her business, her future, her life were worth fighting for. And Ellie Montgomery was more than ready to fight. Ellie stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse, her reflection calm and steady. Her mind was clear, focused. She had been here before, facing difficult conversations, difficult truths. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't just about business. It was about her son, the boy she had raised, the man she had hoped would rise to lead. And now, Ethan was standing on the brink of a decision that could destroy everything. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what was to come. He was on his way. Ethan had asked to meet, and Ellie knew why. He had no other choice but to face her now, the weight of his actions too much to hide any longer. She had learned of the loan, the financial disaster he had brought to Dawson Tech, and the reckless decision to put her at risk. But now, it was time for him to face the consequences. The doorbell rang, and Ellie's pulse quickened. She didn't rush to answer it. She didn't need to. Instead, she stood still for a moment, grounding herself in the calm that had served her so well over the past few months. She wasn't the woman she had been in Seattle, desperate to prove herself, caught in the web of family and business. She had left that life behind. When she opened the door, Ethan stood before her, his face drawn and weary, his usual sharp suit now looking more like a prison he couldn't escape. His eyes met hers, and Ellie could see the layers of guilt and fear clouding his expression. "Mom," Ethan said quietly, his voice hoarse. I didn't know how to come here. I've been trying to fix it on my own, but I know I can't anymore. I need your help." Ellie stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She didn't invite him in right away. She wasn't ready to let him back into her life the way he had been before. He had crossed a line, and it was time for him to see the damage he had done. "You need my help," Ellie echoed, her voice calm but edged with something hard. "After everything you've done, now you need my help." Ethan looked down, his hands nervously adjusting the collar of his shirt, his gaze shifting to the floor. I didn't know who else to turn to," he muttered. "I screwed up, I know that. The loan, everything, I should have come to you sooner. I shouldn't have done it." Ellie stepped back slightly, motioning for him to enter. As Ethan walked into the apartment, Ellie closed the door quietly behind him, but the silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his hands clenching and unclenching in a nervous rhythm. Ellie could see it now, his panic, the way his eyes darted around the room as though looking for something to ground him. She turned slowly to face him, her gaze steady, unwavering. "I know about the loan, Ethan," Ellie said softly, but with a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. "I know you took it out in my name, and I'm on the hook for it now, just like you." Ethan froze, the color draining from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His shoulders sagged as the weight of the situation hit him all at once. "Mom, he began, his voice trembling. "I didn't want to do it. I thought it was the only way to buy us time, the company. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could keep us afloat." Ellie watched him closely, her heart heavy but her mind sharp. He wasn't the man she had hoped he would become. She had spent years pouring everything into Dawson Tech, only to watch it crumble in his hands. He had inherited everything, control of the company, the legacy Nate and she had built, and instead of rising to the challenge, he had allowed it all to unravel. "You didn't think, Ethan," Ellie replied, her voice calm but edged with the weight of years of unspoken truth. "You acted out of desperation. You put me at risk without a second thought. You've thrown away everything we worked for, everything I sacrificed for you." Ethan took a step forward, his eyes wide, his voice cracking with guilt. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I didn't think. I see that now. But I was trying to fix things. I thought I was doing what was best for the company. I was too proud to admit that I didn't know what I was doing. And now it's all falling apart." Ellie felt a pang in her chest. There it was, the remorse she had been waiting for. Ethan, once so arrogant, now standing before her with a rawness she hadn't seen before. He was broken, desperate, and for a moment, Ellie allowed herself to feel the weight of his pain. But that didn't change the reality of the situation. "Pride, Ethan," Ellie said, her voice steady, though her heart hurt. "That's what brought us here, your pride. You didn't want to listen. You didn't want to see that you weren't ready to lead. And now, here we are. The company's in ruins and you're asking me to come back and clean up your mess." Ethan's face contorted with guilt, the tears welling in his eyes. I know, I'm sorry, Mom. I've been an idiot. But please, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm failing. And I need your help to fix it. Ellie didn't respond immediately. She took a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle in. She knew what he wanted, what he needed, but that didn't change the truth. She had already given so much. She had sacrificed everything for him, for the company. And now, for the first time in her life, Ellie realized she didn't need to fix everything anymore. I'm sorry, Ethan, Ellie said quietly, but her voice was firm. But I'm not going back. I've rebuilt my life. I've built my future. I'm not going to drag myself back into the mess you created. Ethan collapsed onto the nearby chair, his face buried in his hands as the weight of her words hit him. The panic in his eyes was now replaced by something else: guilt, regret, and the raw truth of his own mistakes. Ellie stood there, her heart aching as she watched her son break before her. But she didn't waver. This wasn't her battle anymore. She had done everything she could, and now it was his turn to face the consequences of his actions. You have to fix this, Ethan, Ellie said, her voice quiet but resolute. You have to take responsibility for the company you've ruined. I can't do it for you. You've lost me in all of this. But you still have the chance to salvage something. It's your choice now. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity, but Ellie didn't move. She wasn't going to save him this time. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt at peace with her decision. Ellie sat in her office, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, casting soft shadows across the room. Her laptop sat in front of her, an open email on the screen. It had been a quiet day, just a few calls, a couple of emails, and a client meeting that had gone well. Business was still thriving, and Ellie felt a renewed sense of confidence with every passing day. She was building something of her own, and it felt like the weight of the past was finally lifting. But then the email came. It wasn't a long message, just a simple note from Vivienne. But the words were enough to send Ellie's pulse racing. Ellie, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but I need you to see this. Ethan has been using your proprietary business methodologies as if they were his own. I've attached the documents. He's presenting them to the board as part of his new vision. Ellie's hand trembled as she clicked open the attachment. Her eyes scanned the documents, the familiar strategies and systems that she had developed over the years. The language was hers, her methods, were laid out in a way that made them look like Ethan's ideas, as if he had crafted them from scratch. Ellie had spent years perfecting these systems, ensuring that every piece of the puzzle fit together seamlessly, and now, here they were, being presented as someone else's work. Her chest tightened. A sick feeling bloomed in her stomach, and it wasn't just the shock of seeing her intellectual property stolen. It was the betrayal. Ethan. Her son. The realization hit her like a physical blow. After everything she had given to him, after everything she had done for the company, for their family, this was how he repaid her. By stealing the work she had spent years developing and passing it off as his own. The depth of the deceit was staggering. She closed her eyes, trying to calm the rush of emotions that surged through her. Anger, hurt, frustration, betrayal. She had always known Ethan could be reckless, could make bad decisions, but this was something else. This was unethical, dishonorable, and it wasn't just about the company anymore. It was personal. Ellie stood up abruptly, the anger in her chest making it hard to breathe. She paced across the room, her mind whirling as she processed what she had just seen. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just another failure on Ethan's part. This was theft. Intellectual property theft. Her hands clenched into fists, her thoughts racing. She had worked for this, fought for it. She had put in the hours, the blood, the sweat. She had built Dawson Tech with Nate, and together they had created something that changed the industry. But now it felt like Ethan was not just trying to take what wasn't his. He was trying to erase her, to take credit for everything she had done, all while destroying the very company they had built. Ellie's mind snapped into focus. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was about principle. This was about standing up for what was right. She wasn't going to let Ethan get away with this. Not this time. She grabbed her phone and immediately dialed Jamie Cross, her lawyer, the one person who could help her navigate the mess Ethan had created. When he picked up, Ellie didn't waste any time. "Jamie, I need you to help me with something serious," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet determination. "Ethan stolen my intellectual property. He's using my business methodologies and presenting them as his own. I need to know how to proceed legally." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Jamie responded, his voice a mix of concern and professionalism. "Ellie, this is a big deal. It's clear-cut intellectual property theft, and if he's passing it off as his own, that could expose him, and you to serious legal consequences. We'll need to gather evidence and see exactly what he's been doing." "I already have the documents," Ellie replied, her voice hardening. "I'm sending them to you. I want this handled immediately. I'm not going to let him get away with this." "Understood," Jamie said. "I'll review everything and get back to you. You have a strong case, Ellie. We'll take care of it." After hanging up, Ellie sat down again, taking a deep breath. She had known this day might come. She had always known that Ethan's lack of discipline, his arrogance, would lead to something like this. But even as she sat there, processing the depth of his betrayal, she realized that this moment wasn't just about confronting him. It was about taking charge of her future, once and for all. Ethan might have taken what was hers, but she wasn't going to let him keep it. He had underestimated her. He thought he could use her work without consequence, but he had underestimated the lengths to which Ellie would go to protect what she had built. She was done being sidelined. She had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let anyone, least of all her own son, erase her legacy. Later that afternoon, as she sent over the files to Jamie, Ellie felt a sense of purpose rise in her. She wasn't just going to fight to protect her work. She was going to take the power back. She had already built something new, something that was hers alone. But this was personal. Ethan had pushed her to the edge, and now she was going to fight back. No more compromises, no more being dismissed. Ellie Montgomery was done being overlooked, and Ethan was about to learn the true cost of crossing her. Ellie sat at her desk, staring at the stack of legal papers in front of her. It had been weeks since she discovered that Ethan had stolen her intellectual property, and the weight of it still sat heavily on her chest. But as the legal strategy began to take shape, Ellie felt a sense of clarity that she hadn't felt in years. The betrayal stung, but this was not the time for weakness. This was the time for action. The papers on her desk were the beginning of what would be a long, hard battle. She had consulted with Jamie Cross, her trusted lawyer, and together they had built a strategy to take Ethan to task for his actions. The goal was simple: to make sure that Ethan understood the cost of his decisions, not just for the company, but for her. Ellie wasn't just fighting for her intellectual property. She was fighting to take control of her future, to show Ethan, and the world, that she was not someone to be underestimated. Jamie had advised her to start by sending a cease and desist letter to Ethan, demanding that he immediately stop using her proprietary methodologies and cease all efforts to present them as his own. But Ellie knew it would take more than that. She couldn't let Ethan simply sweep this under the rug. She needed to send a message, not just to him, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. After months of painstaking work, the legal action was officially underway. Ellie had decided to sue Ethan for intellectual property theft, seeking damages and an injunction to prevent him from using or distributing her work. The case was straightforward, and Ellie knew the law was on her side. The evidence was clear. Ethan had taken her methodologies and presented them as his own, without any credit or compensation. The law was designed to protect creators like her, and she was determined to make sure it did. But as the case progressed, Ellie found herself grappling with more than just the legal battle. The emotional toll was harder than she had expected. Every legal document, every email from her lawyer, reminded her of the depth of Ethan's betrayal. She had spent so many years supporting him, trying to protect him from the consequences of his actions. But now, it was clear that he had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She wasn't just taking legal action to protect her work. She was protecting her dignity, her integrity, and her right to reclaim control of her life. The courtroom was a far cry from the world of corporate boardrooms she had once known. The lawyers, the paperwork, the endless meetings, it was a world that Ellie had never imagined she would have to navigate. But she was determined. She wasn't going to let Ethan's arrogance and entitlement go unchecked. She had built Dawson Tech, and she wasn't going to let him take credit for her work. Not now, not ever. When the day came for the first hearing, Ellie walked into the courtroom with a quiet confidence. Her suit was simple but professional, her demeanor calm but unyielding. The courtroom buzzed with the usual tension, but Ellie barely noticed. Her focus was sharp, her resolve firm. This wasn't about winning for the sake of victory. It was about holding Ethan accountable, about ensuring that he understood the consequences of his actions. Ethan was already there, sitting across from her, flanked by his own legal team. He looked out of place, his usual confidence replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Ellie's eyes met his briefly, and she saw it, regret flashing in his eyes. It was brief, but it was there. And in that moment, Ellie realized something. This wasn't just about the stolen intellectual property. This was about Ethan finally seeing the truth of his actions. It was about him understanding the cost of his mistakes. As the proceedings began, Ellie listened carefully to the arguments presented by Ethan's defense team. They tried to argue that the methodologies were not proprietary, that Ellie's work had been generalized and therefore not entitled to legal protection. But Ellie's legal team was prepared. They had the evidence, the documentation, and the expert testimony to prove that her intellectual property was uniquely hers, developed over years of hard work and dedication. The case went on for hours, but Ellie never wavered. Her focus was unshakable. She knew she was right. She had been through too much to back down now. When the judge adjourned the hearing, Ellie felt a surge of relief. It wasn't over yet. There would be more hearings, more legal battles to come. But this was a pivotal moment. She had stood her ground, and she had made it clear that she would not be silenced, not by Ethan, and certainly not by anyone else. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, Ellie looked out the window at the Austin skyline. The city lights twinkled below, and for the first time in a long while, Ellie felt a sense of peace. The journey had been long, and the path ahead was uncertain, but she knew she was moving forward, stronger than ever. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up. She had started Dawson Consulting, built a reputation, and proven to herself that she could thrive on her own terms. And now, she had taken back what was rightfully hers. The power had shifted. It was Ethan who was in control anymore. It was Ellie. And no matter what happened next, she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. She had fought for her future, and she had won. Ellie stood in front of the large glass window of her office, staring out at the sprawling Austin skyline. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city, and a soft orange glow bathed the buildings below. She had made her way to the office early this morning, despite the weight of what was about to happen. Today wasn't just another day of client meetings or strategic planning. Today, Ellie was taking control once again, this time not as a consultant, but as a leader standing up for the truth. In just a few hours, she would be in the conference room at Dawson Tech Solutions headquarters, facing a room full of employees who had known her for years. It was time to face the people who had once believed in her, trusted her, and respected her for everything she had done for the company. But now, things had changed. They needed to hear the truth. They needed to know the full extent of what had happened and why. Ellie took a deep breath, steeling herself for the difficult task ahead. She had spent years helping Dawson Tech grow, building it from the ground up with Nate, and later managing it through some of its toughest challenges. But when Ethan had taken the reins, she had been pushed out, marginalized, and ultimately cast aside. He had manipulated the situation, distorted the truth, and now it was time for Ellie to correct the record once and for all. She had already called the meeting, an all-hands company-wide gathering. The invitation had gone out to every department, every division, and every team member who had once played a role in Dawson Tech's success. Ellie had made it clear that it was mandatory, that it was important. The message had been simple: it's time for the truth. As Ellie walked into the conference room, the murmurs of employees quieted. The room was packed, about 50 people, all sitting in rows, looking expectantly toward the front. Ethan wasn't there yet. Ellie stood in front of the large screen at the head of the room, her posture strong and confident. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, and she allowed herself a moment to let the silence build. This was her moment. When the door opened and Ethan walked in, his usual confident stride faltered for just a second as he saw Ellie standing at the front. He froze momentarily, but then, as if quickly recovering, he took his seat at the back of the room, his eyes locking onto hers. His posture was stiff, defensive. Ellie didn't acknowledge him, not yet. This wasn't about him, this was about the truth. Ellie cleared her throat and began, her voice steady but commanding. Thank you all for coming today. I know some of you may be wondering why I called this meeting. The truth is, there are things that need to be said, things that need to be heard, especially by all of you who have been part of Dawson Tech's journey over the years. She paused for a moment, scanning the room. The employees were all watching intently, some leaning forward in their chairs. A few faces were familiar, people who had worked alongside her when the company was thriving. Others were new faces, employees who had come on board after Ellie's departure. She could sense their curiosity, their uncertainty. Many of you may not know the full story of how Dawson Tech got to where it is now, Ellie continued. What I'm about to say is difficult, but it's the truth. For the past several months, I've watched as this company, a company I helped build, has been led down a path of mistakes, mismanagement, and missed opportunities. And for that, there is one person to blame. She turned to face Ethan, who was sitting at the back of the room. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened, but Ellie's gaze didn't falter. She knew she had to say this, she had to expose the truth. Ethan, she said, her voice calm but unyielding, you've taken this company in a direction that has hurt its employees, its clients, and its future. The decisions you've made, cutting corners, taking on unsustainable loans, and failing to listen to those who have experience, have led us here. The room went silent. Ellie could hear the whispers of surprise spreading through the crowd. She could feel the weight of their eyes on Ethan, the pressure building as they waited for his reaction. Ethan, however, didn't respond immediately. He was tense, his fists clenched at his sides. You took out a loan, Ellie continued, without consulting anyone, without considering the long-term consequences. And you didn't just make this mistake for yourself, you put everyone here at risk. You listed me as a co-signer without my consent, and now I'm tied to the debt you've created. You've put the future of Dawson Tech on the line, Ethan, and you've done it recklessly. The tension in the room was thick. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. They had known things weren't right, but hearing it laid out so plainly, so decisively, made it all real. Ellie's gaze never wavered from Ethan. But it doesn't stop there, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. You've been using my intellectual property, my business methodologies, and presenting them as your own. The systems that I spent years perfecting, systems that were designed to take this company to the next level, have been stolen and manipulated. And you've presented them as your own work to further your career, to salvage your reputation. But what you don't realize, Ethan, is that you can't erase what I've done. I built this company. I gave it its foundation, and no amount of deception will change that. Ethan's face had gone pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ellie cut him off before he could say anything. No, Ethan, she said firmly. I've heard enough from you. You've had your chance. You've made your choices, and now it's time for you to face the consequences. The room was still. No one spoke. For the first time, Ellie realized that everyone in the room was seeing the truth. Ethan had been leading the company into the ground, and Ellie was the one who had kept it alive all along. Ellie took a deep breath, her voice lowering, but her resolve only growing. I am the true force behind Dawson Tech's success. It was never about you, Ethan. It was about the team we built, the values we upheld, and the vision we created together. I'm proud of what we accomplished, and I'm proud of the work I did here. But now, it's time to move forward. She paused, looking out over the room. Her gaze swept across the employees. Many of them had been with her through the years, and she could see the recognition in their eyes. The truth was out. As of today, Ellie continued, I am no longer part of Dawson Tech. I'm taking full control of Dawson Consulting, and I will continue to help businesses thrive, on my terms. This is the last time I will stand in this room as a part of this company. But make no mistake, I will not stand idly by while this company falls apart. She looked one last time at Ethan. His face was a mixture of guilt, regret, and frustration. Ellie knew this was it. There would be no going back for either of them. "I wish you well, Ethan," she said quietly, her tone softening just for a moment. "But it's time for you to face your failures and rebuild on your own. I won't be part of this anymore." With that, Ellie turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the company, the son, and the life she had once known. The truth had been revealed, and the shift in power was undeniable. Dawson Tech would never be the same, and neither would Ellie. Ellie stood at the top of the sleek, modern building in downtown Austin, looking out over the city she had come to love. The skyline stretched out before her, a mix of old and new, just like the journey she had been on. It was hard to believe how far she had come, from the shadow of Dawson Tech to now, leading her own company, her own vision. Dawson Consulting had grown rapidly in the months since she took full control. Clients were flooding in, eager to work with a consultant who had a proven track record of success. But even more satisfying was the transformation she had undergone. Ellie had been the silent force behind Dawson Tech's success for so long, but now she was the one leading the charge, setting the pace, and making decisions that shaped the company's future. The merging of Dawson Consulting and Dawson Tech Solutions was a bold move, a strategic partnership that would combine her expertise with the legacy of the company she had built. It wasn't just about business. It was about reclaiming what was hers, taking the power back, and leading Dawson Tech to a new era of growth. As Ellie looked out over the city, her phone buzzed with an incoming email. She smiled, knowing it was from Vivienne, her trusted ally and the glue that had held things together at Dawson Tech during the rocky months. She had played a pivotal role in making the merger a reality, and now, the fruits of their labor were paying off. The merger was complete, and things were moving faster than Ellie could have imagined. It was time to implement the changes she knew were necessary to revitalize the company. The next day, Ellie walked into the Dawson Tech office, now officially part of the merged company. The energy in the building was palpable. Employees were busy at their desks, phones ringing, meetings happening in every corner. But there was a new energy now, a fresh sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the company Ethan had run into the ground. It was her company now, and it was flourishing. As she entered the conference room, she was greeted by her new leadership team. Vivienne was there, of course, but so were a few familiar faces from Dawson Tech, people who had stuck around despite the turmoil. Ellie was grateful for their loyalty. They were the backbone of the company, and together, they would rebuild what had been lost. "All right, team," Ellie began, standing at the head of the table, her voice strong and steady. "We've merged two great companies, but it's time to make sure we're not just surviving. We're going to thrive. Our systems need to be streamlined, our clients need to know we're committed to excellence, and we need to prove we're a force to be reckoned with. Let's talk strategy." The meeting kicked off with an energy that Ellie hadn't seen in a long time. She began outlining the new strategies for client relationships, emphasizing personalized service, transparent communication, and cutting-edge technology that would set them apart from competitors. She introduced new operational systems, including project management tools that would bring efficiency and clarity to every department. Ellie knew that the key to growth wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about making the company future-proof, ensuring that the systems and relationships they built today would carry them into tomorrow. The team responded with enthusiasm. It wasn't just about Ellie's vision anymore. It was about everyone working together to make the company something greater than it had been before. Her leadership, her ability to inspire and guide, had already begun to shift the culture of Dawson Tech. There was a palpable sense of purpose, of accountability, that had been lacking under Ethan's reign. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was struggling to keep up. Ellie knew it was inevitable. He had been forced to scale back operations, cut more staff, and had little to show for his attempts to steer Dawson Tech out of its financial slump. The loan he had taken out was still hanging over his head, and with each passing day, the board grew more frustrated with his leadership. Ellie wasn't blind to the challenges of merging two companies. There were obstacles to overcome, systems to integrate, and growing pains to endure. But the difference now was that Ellie was in control. The company's success wasn't reliant on blind luck or desperate measures. It was driven by careful strategy, forward thinking, and a commitment to excellence. A week later, Ellie received a call from Vivienne, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Ellie, the client relationships you've revitalized, especially the ones from Murphy Ventures and Nova Innovations, are already seeing results. They're renewing contracts, and word is spreading that Dawson Tech is back on track. You've done it. We've done it." Ellie felt a surge of pride as she heard Vivienne's words. She had known that bringing Dawson Tech and Dawson Consulting together was the right move. But hearing that the company was already regaining momentum made the long months of planning and strategizing feel worthwhile. She wasn't just turning the company around. She was setting the stage for something bigger, something lasting. As she hung up the phone, Ellie looked around the office, at the energized faces of her team, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The power had shifted. She had shifted it. And as Dawson Tech grew stronger with each passing day, the contrast between her success and Ethan's struggle was more evident than ever. Ellie's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a new potential client. She smiled. The future was full of possibility, and for the first time in a long while, she was excited about what was to come. She had reclaimed her place at the helm, and there was no turning back now. The quiet hum of Austin's skyline settled in as Ellie sat in her favorite chair by the window, sipping her coffee. The city was waking up beneath her, and for the first time in months, Ellie felt a deep sense of contentment settle in her chest. The storm of the past was slowly dissipating, leaving behind the calm of a new beginning. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her peaceful morning. It was a message from Vivienne. "Ethan wants to meet. He's asking for a second chance." Ellie set her cup down and stared at the message, feeling a mixture of surprise and resignation. She had been expecting this. Over the past few months, Ethan's calls had become less frequent, his attempts to reclaim his former position more desperate. But this felt different. Something in his words, in the way Vivienne had described him, told her that Ethan was no longer the man he had been. She had been waiting for this moment, but that didn't make it any easier. Ethan's mistakes had cost him dearly, not just professionally, but personally. He had lost so much, but more than anything, Ellie had realized that she had already done everything she could for him. The rest was up to him. With a deep breath, she tapped out a response. "All right, I'll meet him. Let's see what he has to say." Later that afternoon, Ellie arrived at a small, quiet cafe near the office, a place that had become one of her favorites in the city. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the table where Ethan was already waiting. He was sitting with his hands folded on the table, his usual sharp suit replaced with something more casual, a simple jacket and shirt, the sleeves rolled up. There was a weariness in his eyes, a rawness that Ellie hadn't seen before. It was a far cry from the cocky, self-assured young man who had taken over Dawson Tech with arrogance and pride. This Ethan was someone who had faced failure head-on, and it had broken him. Ellie sat down across from him, studying his face for a long moment. There was no anger in her heart anymore, no bitterness. But there was a quiet strength, a resolve that had only grown with time. She had built something for herself, something beyond Dawson Tech, beyond Ethan. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. "Mom," Ethan began, his voice quieter than she expected. I know I've made a mess of everything. I don't even know where to start." Ellie nodded, giving him the space to continue. She had spent so many years holding back her own feelings, supporting him in every way she could. But now, it was his turn to face the music. "I thought I could do it, you know," Ethan continued, his eyes meeting hers. "I thought I could take control, that I could lead like Dad did, but the truth is, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for what it would take to really lead this company, and I lost sight of what mattered. I pushed you away when you were the one person who had always been there for me." Ellie's gaze softened. This was the Ethan she had hoped for, the one who could finally admit his mistakes, who could see the damage he had caused. It wasn't easy for him, but it was real. And that was the first step toward healing. I pushed you away because I was too proud, Ethan continued, the words tumbling out now, raw and honest. I didn't want to admit I needed you, and then I tried to fix it all on my own without understanding that the company and our family needed a leader who could listen. I was so focused on proving myself that I lost sight of what was important. Ellie didn't speak immediately. She didn't need to. She let Ethan's words hang in the air, giving him the time to reflect on the path he had taken. He wasn't the young man who had taken her for granted anymore. This Ethan was realizing the depth of his mistakes, but Ellie knew that the journey toward redemption was far from over. After a long silence, Ellie finally spoke. Ethan, I'm not angry with you anymore. I'm disappointed, yes, but I'm not angry. You've made mistakes and you've hurt the company and me, but it's not too late. You still have a chance to turn things around. But you need to understand one thing. Leadership isn't about doing it all on your own. It's about building a team, trusting the people around you, and being willing to learn from them. Ethan nodded, his face reflecting the weight of her words. I understand. I can't fix everything overnight, but I'm ready to start. I've learned that it's not just about me. It's about the people who have supported me, people like you, Mom. Ellie's heart stirred, but she kept her composure. Good. You've taken the first step. Now it's time to rebuild, and that's going to take time, effort, and most importantly, humility. I'm not going to carry the weight for you anymore, Ethan, but I'm here if you want to learn, if you want to do it right. For the first time, Ellie saw a glimmer of hope in Ethan's eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. She didn't know what the future held for him, but for the first time in a long while, Ellie believed that he was ready to lead the way forward. Not by his own will, but with the lessons he had learned from his mistakes. As they finished their coffee and walked out of the cafe together, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Ethan had made mistakes, but he was finally ready to face them. And Ellie, for the first time in years, was ready to let go of the past. She had reclaimed her own power, and it was time to let Ethan find his way. Ellie walked down the sidewalk, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had built something great on her own, and now she realized it wasn't just about her success. It was about her strength, her resilience, and the ability to let go. And as for Ethan, well, his journey was just beginning. But this time, Ellie was at peace with the role she had played. She had built something greater than anyone could have imagined. Not just a company, but a future, one that was entirely her own.